It began as a whisper, an image that wasn't supposed to exist, a fragment of data buried deep in the James Webb Space Telescope's archives. At first, it looked like noise, a glitch in the spectrographic readings, but it wasn't random. The pattern was too precise, too rhythmic, too deliberate. What the telescope saw wasn't a flare or a dying star. It wasn't a comet or a meteor. It was something else. Something cold, controlled, and terrifyingly exact. The object was known as 3I/ATLAS, an interstellar visitor, a wanderer from beyond the sun's reach. We'd seen travelers like it before, Oumuamua, Borisov, strange bodies that came and went, obeying gravity and chaos alike. But this one broke every rule we knew. From the start, its behavior made no sense. It didn't have a tail, no coma of vapor, no bright trail of dust like a typical comet. Instead, 3I/ATLAS emitted only one thing, carbon dioxide. No water, no methane, no carbon monoxide, just pure CO2, and in massive, consistent quantities. Nothing in the known universe behaves like that. Not asteroids, not comets, nothing. When NASA's SphereX observatory turned its instruments on the object, scientists expected to find water ice sublimating into space, as with every other icy body warmed by the sun. But the results came back empty. No ice, no water, no organic compounds, only carbon dioxide, expelled in perfect rhythm, like a controlled release valve. And that was when things started to get strange. Because natural objects don't behave with rhythm. They decay. They tumble. They fracture. This wasn't chaos. This was control. By the time Webb was ordered to observe it directly, the data was already under lock and key. No press releases, no images, not even confirmation that the observation had happened. But inside NASA, the truth was spreading. Someone had leaked the internal report. And in that leak was a single line that changed everything. Object surrounded by symmetrical CO2 halo, origin of emission indeterminate, source internal. The data showed that the object wasn't reflecting sunlight, it was glowing from within. Infrared scans showed a faint pulsing brightness, a light that wasn't thermal but structured. It wasn't heat, it was signal. When analysts decomposed the emission into wavelengths, the results chilled them. The light followed a repeating pattern of peaks and troughs, like the modulation of a radio wave. The same kind of structured energy humans use for telecommunications. It was as though something inside 3I/ATLAS wasn't just emitting light, it was transmitting. No one wanted to believe it. For days, astrophysicists and data analysts tore through the readings, looking for instrument interference, reflections, data ghosts, anything to explain it away. But the pattern persisted, each cycle of emission repeated with mathematical precision, a beat of energy every 11.4 seconds, a cosmic heartbeat. And the strangest part wasn't the rhythm, it was the silence between pulses, perfect, deliberate gaps of darkness, like pauses between words. Was it random, or was it waiting? Then came the next revelation. When Webb measured the object's apparent size, the numbers didn't add up. What astronomers thought was a modest rock, maybe 10 or 15 kilometers across, turned out to be far, far larger, 46 kilometers in diameter. That made 3I/ATLAS the largest interstellar object ever observed. By a margin so extreme, it defied statistical possibility. A rock that size, drifting in from another star system, would be rarer than a grain of sand landing on a single atom. The only two explanations were equally terrifying. Either our understanding of interstellar debris was catastrophically wrong, or this wasn't debris at all. It wasn't just the size that frightened researchers. It was the shape. The data showed a perfect symmetry to the CO2 halo, an even, balanced emission pattern that circled the object like an engineered atmosphere. Natural gas ejections form chaotic plumes, but this one was organized, as if something beneath the surface was controlling the flow. It wasn't outgassing, it was operating. Inside NASA's private channels, panic started to brew. Leaked memos spoke of non-natural emission structures, signal harmonics, and probable artificial modulation. Engineers began using a phrase that had never appeared in official documentation before, technologically suggestive. It wasn't the first time that phrase had been used in whispers. Back in 2017, when Oumuamua passed through our system, a Harvard physicist named Avi Loeb suggested it might have been artificial, a solar sail from another civilization. He was ridiculed for it. But now, with 3I/ATLAS, even his harshest critics had gone silent. Because this time, the evidence was undeniable, and then came the detail that froze every scientist who saw it. When analysts traced the object's inbound trajectory, they realized 3I/ATLAS hadn't wandered in randomly like a stray comet. Its path was perfect, lying almost exactly along the solar system's orbital plane. That might sound meaningless, but it's not. The chances of an interstellar object naturally entering the solar system on that exact alignment are less than 1 in 500. It didn't crash in, it flew in. The trajectory placed it within visual range of nearly every major space observatory on Earth. A path that seemed designed for visibility, as though it wanted to be seen, but only just enough to remain mysterious. And its point of origin, the constellation of Sagittarius, the same region of sky where, in 1977, radio astronomers picked up the famous WOW signal, one of the strongest candidates for extraterrestrial communication ever recorded. Coincidence or continuity? Scientists debated it in private, but deep down, none of them believed in coincidence anymore. Because even for the most rational minds, something about 3I/ATLAS felt alive, intentional, observant. When word of the leak reached the public, NASA tried to contain it, but you can't silence data once it's seen. In hushed conference calls and encrypted messages, researchers started using another word, not comet, not asteroid, craft. Imagine it, a colossal body, 46 kilometers wide, drifting across interstellar space for eons, its core pulsing with hidden energy, its shell cloaked in gas and dust to mimic a comet's disguise. A vessel designed not to stand out, but to blend in. Some said it could be a hollowed-out asteroid, a natural rock retrofitted with technology, a machine buried inside a mountain of stone. A method even human engineers have theorized for future star travel. If that's true, then 3I/ATLAS isn't just a traveler. It's a message, a presence, a piece of something much older, much wiser, and far beyond anything we've ever imagined. And as the James Webb Telescope continued to stare into that silent, glowing shape, something began to change in the data, a flicker in the light, a pattern too deliberate to ignore. It was as if the object knew it was being watched, and for the first time in history, the universe wasn't silent anymore. It was responding. The moment the Webb data leaked, everything changed. What began as curiosity turned into quiet panic. Because the deeper scientists dug into the readings from 3I/ATLAS, the more it looked less like nature and more like intention. The light it emitted wasn't fading with distance as it should have. It was adjusting, correcting, responding. And then came the proof no one wanted to see. Across multiple observatories, the pulses from 3I/ATLAS began forming sequences, not random flickers or chemical bursts, but precise repeating intervals. The pattern was unmistakable, prime numbers: 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. The same mathematical fingerprint that SETI researchers had theorized for decades would be used in any intelligent communication. Natural bodies don't count. That's when NASA classified every observation under a code name, TUEEOS, Technological Unknowns of Extraterrestrial Origin. Internally, it was described as a potentially responsive non-natural emitter. But those who saw the raw data had a simpler word for it: a beacon, and maybe worse, one that could listen back. Because each burst of light was followed by a gap, a deliberate pause, like a conversation waiting for an answer. When engineers tried to synchronize a low-band radio transmission to the pulse, nothing came back. But 1 hour later, 3I/ATLAS's signal subtly shifted. The gap between its prime number bursts changed by exactly 1%, the same offset as the delay between our broadcast and the object's distance in space. It wasn't just pulsing anymore, it was acknowledging. That realization didn't stay inside NASA for long. Within 48 hours, the U.S. military's Orbital Division, NORAD, and the U.S. Space Force jointly launched the X-37B, a secretive, uncrewed spaceplane whose purpose, this time, was classified. But its orbit wasn't. Amateur astronomers tracked it immediately. It was positioned perfectly to keep 3I/ATLAS in its line of sight. What was the mission? Observation or contact? No one knew. But when the launch logs disappeared from public access, it was clear enough. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just a scientific anomaly anymore. It was a national security threat. And yet, behind the silence, new theories were being whispered. Theories that didn't sound like science fiction anymore. What if 3I/ATLAS wasn't a comet, or a probe, or a vessel, but something alive? Not biological in the way we understand, but something older. Something that grew from matter the way life grows from cells. A hybrid, half organic, half machine. A being designed not to travel through the stars, but to become part of them. A system that thinks in radiation and speaks in gravity. To most of the scientific community, that idea was absurd. But Webb's next set of readings made it impossible to ignore. The telescope picked up infrared emissions that couldn't be explained by reflection, propulsion, or decay. They were internal, radiation waves originating from deep inside the object, rising and falling in harmonic resonance. The same phenomenon seen in electrical circuits and biological neural networks. Whatever was inside 3I/ATLAS wasn't just reacting, it was processing. That's when a young spectroscopist at the European Space Agency did something reckless. She took the emission data, all of it, and ran it through a neural AI designed for detecting encoded information. The algorithm spat out an image. It wasn't a face. It wasn't a map. It was a pattern. 6 lines intersecting at geometric ratios identical to the human genome's helical turn angle. At first, she thought it was coincidence, but as she fed in more data, the algorithm kept reproducing the same structure, over and over again. It wasn't random, it was biological. When she presented the result to her supervisors, they told her to delete it. Within 24 hours, her access to Webb's raw data was revoked. The report was buried under a digital lockout. She leaked it anyway. And that leak confirmed what many inside already feared. 3I/ATLAS's signals were carrying something more than light, information. Encoded within the pulse frequency were resonant patterns that matched human DNA motifs. Sequences that shouldn't exist in a comet, but did. Not a full genome, not enough to be readable life, but fragments, echoes, like a reflection of something that already exists here. That's when the fear shifted. Because if 3I/ATLAS contained fragments of our genetic code, it didn't just mean it could be alive. It might mean it had been here before. What if this wasn't our first meeting? What if it's been passing through our system for millions of years, seeding worlds, adjusting trajectories, observing how far one planet's life would evolve before coming back to see what became of it? When NASA's top analysts recalculated its orbital path, the truth made their blood run cold. This wasn't a random flyby. Its current route would bring it back toward the asteroid belt in less than 9 months. And then, according to gravitational modeling, it would shift again, sliding inward between Mars and Earth. A maneuver like that can't happen by chance. It requires calculation, propulsion, intention. They started calling it the final observation phase. But what exactly was it observing? That's when something unexplainable began to happen. In the weeks following Webb's deep scan, instruments across the deep space network began to fail, one by one. At first, it looked like interference from solar radiation. But when engineers analyzed the timing, the failures lined up perfectly with Webb's observation windows. The moments when the telescope was locked on 3I/ATLAS. It was as if the object knew when it was being watched, and every time we tried to look closer, something shut our eyes for us. Voyager 2 went silent for 21 minutes, the same duration as Webb's exposure sequence that night. When it came back online, the probe's onboard memory had reset. Entire strings of telemetry data were gone, deleted. A coincidence? Maybe once, not twice. Because when the New Horizons probe, drifting in the far outer solar system, turned its sensors toward the same coordinates, its signal degraded too. Same distortion, same duration. It wasn't a system error, it was interference. Something was deliberately blocking our gaze. And when you block a gaze, you're doing more than hiding, you're defending. Was it a form of shielding, a cloaking response, or something worse, a warning? The moment Webb's feed came back online, its imaging sensors picked up something new. The reflection around 3I/ATLAS had changed. The once symmetrical halo of carbon dioxide was gone, replaced by a faint ring of plasma stretching thousands of kilometers wide, glowing in ultraviolet light. It wasn't diffused gas, it was structured, coiled like a filament, swirling in spirals too precise to be natural. The object was building something around itself, or maybe becoming something else entirely. At the same time, the pulse sequence shifted again, no longer prime numbers, this time a countdown. And when analysts converted the intervals into time signatures, one number appeared again and again. 283 days. A countdown to what, no one could say. But deep inside NASA's locked channels, someone had written a note next to it. Phase 4, arrival window. No one knows what that means. But the countdown didn't come from us. It came from 3I/ATLAS, and it had already begun. By the time the countdown appeared, the silence inside NASA wasn't confusion anymore. It was fear. The pattern from 3I/ATLAS hadn't changed for weeks. Then one morning it did, a sudden shift, a flicker, a brief, almost imperceptible change in tone, like a key being pressed too hard on a piano. Every observatory tuned into it saw the same thing. A new pulse embedded inside the countdown sequence, smaller, faster, repeating 12 times before vanishing again. When the data was slowed down and converted into sound, It wasn't random noise. It was a rhythm. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, pause, then 12. It didn't sound like communication anymore. It sounded like a signal response. Hours later, an astronomer at the European Space Agency noticed something buried in the hydrogen line readings, the same frequency the universe itself uses as a kind of common language. The emission wasn't steady, it was split. It carried an echo as though something else were broadcasting it back. That something else wasn't anywhere near 3 I/ATLAS. It was coming from behind the sun. Whatever was responding was close. Within days, magnetometers on Earth and aboard satellites began to spike again. Small at first, background vibrations, whispers of magnetic fluctuation, but then stronger, measurable even by civilian devices. The pattern matched perfectly with the countdown intervals. Every 12 hours and 3 minutes, a pulse of energy swept across the solar system, each one stronger than the last. At first, no one connected it. Then someone at Caltech overlaid the new magnetic pulse onto a map of 3 I/ATLAS's projected orbit. The result sent a chill through every lab watching the data. The pulses aligned exactly with Earth's magnetic axis. In other words, it wasn't sending its signal into deep space anymore. It was focusing it here. Every scientist who saw the data went quiet. The object wasn't heading toward Earth by accident. It was synchronizing with it. And when a group of astrophysicists converted the energy spikes into visual spectrograms, they discovered something buried deep within the static, a pattern. At first, it looked like nothing more than noise. But when rendered in polar coordinates, the same way cosmic microwave data is plotted, the distortion formed a picture. Not an image, not exactly. A structure. 6 points of light connected by curves and arcs, identical to the orbital paths of the inner planets. And right in the middle, faint and pulsing, was us. Earth. It was mapping our solar system. Not from observation, from memory. Because when they backtracked the timestamps, it became clear that 3 I/ATLAS had transmitted that exact map before it ever entered our solar system. It knew where we were before it got here. That realization fractured the scientific world. Every equation, every rule about random interstellar motion fell apart. You can't predict something you've never seen unless you've seen it before. Then, Webb's final observations arrived. In its last images before the object disappeared behind the sun, the telescope captured something extraordinary. A shadow, thin, sharp, and perfectly linear, trailing behind 3 I/ATLAS. At first, everyone thought it was dust, but the shadow didn't move with light, it moved with the object itself. No matter where the sun's light hit, the shadow stayed in place, fixed, constant, immune to angle or distance. It wasn't a shadow cast by light, it was a shadow projected by force, a gravitational shadow. The object was bending space itself, shaping its own darkness like a cloak. The internal term that leaked from Webb's engineering logs was self-shading body, a phrase that has never existed in scientific literature before. It meant the impossible, that 3 I/ATLAS was manipulating the structure of space around it, not just moving through gravity, but using it. If that's true, it's not a rock, not a ship, not a comet. It's something that uses the laws of physics as its language, a being that doesn't just survive in the universe, it writes in it. Weeks later, as the object slipped behind the sun and out of range, the world thought the story was over. NASA stopped releasing data. The military went silent. The countdown, still echoing faintly through space, faded from the public's attention. Until Voyager 1, humanity's oldest messenger, heard it. 26 billion kilometers from home, Voyager picked up a signal. Not a transmission, but a vibration in spacetime itself. A gravitational tone identical to the one Webb had last recorded. And when engineers decoded it, they found something they hadn't seen in almost 30 years. The same sequence that Voyager had recorded in 1996, static dismissed as background noise, was back, identical. It hadn't been random then, it was a prelude, and now it was calling back. Someone at JPL ran the signal through star maps, just to see if there was any hidden geometry. When the energy bursts were aligned across galactic coordinates, they formed something astonishing. A map, not of our solar system, but of the Triangulum galaxy, 2.5 million light-years away. At the center of that map was a return path, a line that led straight back to us. 3I/ATLAS wasn't lost. It wasn't wandering. It was coming back. That was when the theory changed forever. The object wasn't a ship. It wasn't even a machine. It was consciousness itself, encoded in radiation, magnetism, gravity. A mind built not from neurons, but from stars, living through the motion of galaxies. A thought that moves between worlds, carrying the memory of everything it touches. It doesn't fly. It unfolds. It doesn't think. It exists. And now it's here again. If the data from Webb is right, if Voyager's echoes are real, then what we're seeing isn't an arrival. It's a cycle, a loop that repeats every few centuries, each time closer, each time louder, each time clearer. We once thought 3I/ATLAS was just a visitor, a wanderer, a passing curiosity. But the evidence now points to something far greater and far more terrifying. It isn't passing through, it's observing. And if the countdown really is what it seems, if it ends when it aligns between Mars and Earth, then maybe it isn't warning us. Maybe it's waiting for us to understand. Because when James Webb looked at that flickering light across the void, it didn't just see another comet. It saw a mirror. And maybe, just maybe, what's coming isn't alien at all. Maybe it's us, returning home,